Continuing in Voss's Biblical Theology, print page 102, PDF 110, The Prominence of Moses. We must now show that from very early times, Moses did occupy a most prominent place in the religious consciousness of Israel. This can be done without venturing out into the labyrinth of Pentateuchal criticism with all its confusing paths of authorships and dates. Without dispute, in the oldest Pentateuchal stories, Moses stands out as the great religious leader of his people, and these stories are, according to the critics, even in their written form, older than the 8th century prophets. The stories as orally circulating must have been, of course, much older still. In the oldest writing prophets, Amos and Hosea, a supreme place is given to Moses. Hosea says, "By a prophet Jehovah brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was he preserved." Hosea 12:13. Amos, while not mentioning him by name, evidently thinks of Moses in connection with the words, "the whole family which I brought up out of the land of Egypt." And that an ethical purpose was connected with this act of redemption is shown in the next words. "You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore I will visit upon you all your iniquities." Amos 3:1 and 2, compare Isaiah 63:11, Jeremiah 15:1. The true inward significance of Moses when we place him within the unfolding scheme of revelation can be made clear in several directions. For one thing, he was, retrospectively considered, instrumental in bringing the great patriarchal promises to an incipient fulfillment, at least in their external provisional embodiment. Israel became in truth a great nation, and this was due not exclusively to their rapid increase. The organization received through Moses enabled them to attain national coherence. Moses likewise led them to the border of the Promised Land. Before a blessing could actually proceed from Israel to the nations, it was first of all necessary that the fundamental difference between Israel and the nations, that is, the principal difference between true religion and paganism, should be clearly exhibited. And this was done through the conflict between Israel and Egypt, which Moses precipitated. It will be shown afterwards that this conflict was not superficially confined to the national political sphere, but sprang from deeper religious principles. Therefore, after a negative fashion, credit for preparing the way for the fulfillment of the third promise also cannot be withheld from Moses. Prospectively considered, Moses also occupies a dominant place in the religious development of the Old Testament. He is placed not merely at the head of the succession of prophets, but placed over them in advance. His authority extends over subsequent ages. The later prophets do not create anything new. They only predict something new. It is true, Moses can be coordinated with the prophets. Deuteronomy 18:18, "A prophet like unto thee." Nevertheless, the prophets themselves are clearly conscious of the unique position of Moses. They put his work not so much on a line with their own as with the stupendous eschatological work of Jehovah for his people expected in the latter days. Compare Isaiah 10:26, 11:11, and so on. According to Numbers 12:7, Moses was set over all God's house. It is entirely in keeping with this prospective import of Moses and his work that his figure acquires typical proportions to an unusual degree. He may be fitly called the Redeemer of the Old Testament. Nearly all the terms in use for the redemption of the New Testament can be traced back to his time. There was in his work such a close connection between revealing words and redeeming acts as can be paralleled only from the life of Christ. And the acts of Moses were to a high degree supernatural, miraculous acts. This typical relation of Moses to Christ can easily be traced in each of the three offices we are accustomed to distinguish in the soteric work of Christ. The prophet of Deuteronomy 18:15, reaching his culmination in the Messiah, is like unto Moses. Moses fulfilled priestly functions at the inauguration of the old Berit, before the Aaronic priesthood was instituted. Exodus 24:4-8. Our Lord refers to this as a typical transaction when inaugurating the new diatheke at the institution of the supper, Luke 22:20. Moses intercedes for Israel after the commission of the sin of the golden calf, and that by offering his own person vicariously for bearing the punishment of the guilty. Exodus 32:30-33. A royal figure, of course, Moses could not at that time be called, for Jehovah alone is King of Israel. Nonetheless, through his legislative function, Moses typified the royal office of Christ. All this reflected itself in the peculiar relation the people were made to sustain toward Moses. This relation is even described as one of faith and of trust. Exodus 14:31, 19:9. The resemblance of this relation of the Israelites towards Moses to the relation of the Christian towards Christ had not escaped the notice of Paul, who says that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea. 1 Corinthians 10:1-3. Just as in baptism, an intimate relation is established between the believer and Christ based on the saviorship of Christ, even so the mighty acts of divine deliverance wrought through Moses pledged Israel to faith in him. And as during the ministry of Jesus, faith and unbelief proved the two decisive factors, so during the wilderness journey, a great drama of faith and unbelief was enacted, deciding the people's fate. Hebrews 3:4. B. The form of revelation in the Mosaic period. Here we must distinguish between the revelation directly communicated to and through the person of Moses on the one hand, and forms of revelation emerging in his time, but not directly passing through his person. In harmony with the important role played by Moses, we find a special clearness and directness affirmed of the intercourse between him and God. There was no prophet who was honored with the direct and continuous access to Jehovah that Moses enjoyed. In this respect, also Moses seems to have prefigured Christ. As Christ reveals the Father in virtue of a most direct and an uninterrupted vision of him, and not as a result of isolated communications, so Moses, though to a lower degree, stands nearer to God and is more, in all that he speaks and does, the mouthpiece of God than any subsequent prophet. The distinction between Moses on the one hand and Aaron and Miriam on the other is formulated in Numbers 12. Here he is called my servant Moses, not in the menial sense of merely a servant, but in the high sense of a trusted servant, initiated into all that his master does. He is faithful in all God's house. This name, servant of Jehovah, is afterwards given to the Messiah in the prophecy of Isaiah. Moses appreciated the unique distinction applied in this, Exodus 33:12. Most strikingly, Moses' intimate relation to God and the honor it conferred are symbolized by the reflection of divine glory on his countenance after the 40 days and 40 nights spent with God upon the mountain. Exodus 34:29 and following. Paul, while recognizing the greatness, dwells rather on its limitations, as compared with the glory of his own ministration under the new diatheke in 2 Corinthians 3. The Pentateuch itself recognizes these limitations. According to Exodus 33:17-23, Moses was not permitted to see the face of God, but only, as it is anthropomorphically called, his back. It is no contradiction to this when in Numbers 12, Moses is said to behold the temunah, the form of God, for this is not identical with the face. True, it is also said that God spake with him face to face, Exodus 33:11. Face to face is an adverbial phrase synonymous with mouth to mouth, and by no means equivalent to a vision of the divine face, Numbers 12:8. Compare further, Exodus 34:5, stood with him there and proclaimed the name of Jehovah. Also, 33:18 and 19, show me thy glory. I will make all my goodness, probably goodliness, loveliness, pass before thee, and will proclaim the name of Jehovah before thee. On the occasion of Exodus 24:10, when Moses with the others had gone up on the mountain, after the making of the Berit, in order to see the God of Israel, what they actually saw was not the divine face, but only, as it were, God's feet. This is the same idea as is expressed in the figure of the back of God, Exodus 33:23. The forms of revelation connected with the work of Moses, though not communicated through him personally, are four in number: the pillar and the cloud, the angel of Jehovah, the name of Jehovah, the face of Jehovah. These have in common that they express the permanence of the divine presence and are distinguished in that respect from the fleeting, ephemeral forms of manifestation in the patriarchal period. The significance of this can be understood only if it be placed in the larger setting of the divine communication with mankind in general. Before the fall, there was such an abiding presence of God with man in paradise. After the fall, a certain remnant of this continued, though not in the old gracious form. The throne with the cherubim still stood in the east of the garden of God. God still walked with Enoch. With the flood, all this is changed. God has, as it were, withdrawn the sacramental revelation presence into heaven. This, however, was an abnormal state of things, for the ultimate design of all God's converse with man is that he may make his abode with his people. Consequently, from now on, all revelation tends towards the realization of this design. The theophanies of the patriarchal period must be regarded as incipient fulfillments of it. But the fulfillment was only partial. The presence was there only at times. It was granted to a few select persons only. It was confined to the great turning points in their history. It was veiled in deepest mystery. With the time of Moses, there came the opposite to this in all respects. The pillar of cloud and fire. Of the pillar of cloud and fire, we read in the following passages, Exodus 13:21 and 22, where it is explicitly stated that Jehovah was in the phenomenon and that it did not depart from before the people. Afterwards, it moves to a position behind them so as to be between them and their Egyptian pursuers before the passage through the Red Sea, Exodus 14. Through the pillar, Jehovah looks forth upon the Egyptians to discomfit them. When the people murmured because they doubted the divine presence with them, the glory of Jehovah appeared in the cloud, Exodus 16. Next, we meet with a cloud revealing Jehovah on Sinai at the giving of the law, which cloud is also called a fire, although nothing is said about a pillar on this occasion, Exodus 19. In Exodus 24:16, this same cloud upon Sinai is mentioned again as containing the glory of Jehovah, the appearance of which is described as like devouring fire, verse 17, and Moses enters into the midst of the cloud, verse 18. After this, we meet with the pillar again in Exodus 33:9, where it descends from the mount or from heaven and stands at the door of the provisional tent pitched by Moses, while all the people worship everyone at his tent door. Verse 10. According to Exodus 34:5, Jehovah descends from heaven in the cloud upon Mount Sinai. It is altogether probable that the so-called Shekinah, the glory in the Holy of Holies of tabernacle and temple, was a continuation of all this. In fact, the feature of permanence so strongly emphasized almost requires it. Of this, however, we shall speak later when dealing with the tabernacle. The angel of Jehovah. Of the angel of Jehovah, we read first in Exodus 3, verse 2, where he appears to Moses in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush, and his identity with God is shown by the fact of God's calling unto Moses out of the bush. Next, we find him referred to in Exodus 14:19. Here he goes before the camp of Israel, and with the pillar moves from before to behind. In Exodus 23:20 and 21, a formal promise is made regarding him. He is to accompany Israel. Behold, I send an angel before thee to keep thee by the way, and to bring thee unto the place which I have prepared. Take ye heed before him, and hearken unto his voice. Provoke him not, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. The entire tenor of this passage forbids our thinking that an ordinary angel is spoken of, although the text reads an angel, not the angel. From the Septuagint reading, my angel, we may infer that this form, with the suffix, stood originally in the Hebrew text. We learn from the statement that the angel's function was the comprehensive one of leading the people to Canaan. We further learn that, in respect of sinning against him, he is identical with God. On the other hand, in Exodus 32:34, we meet with my angel, and in Exodus 33:2 with an angel. The situation here requires this, for the sending of the angel appears as a retraction of Jehovah's original promise that he himself would go with the people. Exodus 33:3-5. And the sending of the angel of Jehovah could not have been represented as anything less than Jehovah's own going. It is only after Moses' expostulation at the changed proposal that God finally is prevailed upon to abide by the original agreement. My presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. Exodus 33:14. The angel of Jehovah appears in the history of Balaam, Numbers 22, where he frustrates Balak's design for cursing Israel. This forms a concrete instance of his general task, consisting in the guidance and defense of his people. The name and the face of Jehovah. In two of the angel contexts discussed, we have already met with the two remaining revelation forms, the name and the face of Jehovah. The name we encountered in Exodus 23:21, where it is affirmed that the name is in the angel. Nothing short of identification can be meant by this, for it is stated as the ground why sin committed against the name-bearing angel will not be pardoned by him. The other form, the presence, met us in Exodus 33:14, my presence shall go with thee. This must be equivalent to Jehovah's own going. Presence stands for the Hebrew panim, which also proves the identification. The panim is likewise identified with the angel. Isaiah, referring to the wilderness journey, says that the angel of God's panim saved the people. Isaiah 63:9. One more identification occurs in Deuteronomy. It is that between the name and the glory in the sanctuary. Jehovah is said to have put his name in the place of the sanctuary. The place where his name is called his habitation. Jehovah causes his name to dwell there. Deuteronomy 12:5, 11, 21, and so on. It is plain, especially from the latter way of speaking, that the phrase is meant to be understood realistically. It is not a mere figure of speech for saying that the sanctuary is God's property, nor that his magnificent name is in the exercise of the cultus pronounced or called upon there. Of dwelling in the sanctuary, God himself is always the subject. From the foregoing, it will be noted that to these three meanings previously found for the name of God in a religious sense, a fourth one must be added. In this fourth sense, the name is not something in the apprehension of man. It is objective, equivalent to Jehovah himself. Still, there always remains a difference in point of view between Jehovah as such and his name. The name is God in revelation. And the same distinction applies to the use of the Shekinah, the angel of the presence. C, the content of the Mosaic revelation. We now come to the discussion of the content of the Mosaic revelation. This part of the subject is complex, and hence it will be necessary clearly to place before ourselves at the outset the main divisions belonging to it. These are A, the factual basis of the Mosaic organization given in the redemption from Egypt. B, the making of the Berit with Israel, with which the organization entered into being. C, the general nature of the organization, the theocracy. D, the Decalogue. E, the ritual law, its symbolical and typical character, with the three strands composing it, that of divine indwelling, that of sacrifice, that of purification. 1. The factual basis of the Mosaic organization consisting in the redemption from Egypt. The Exodus from Egypt is the Old Testament redemption. This is not an anachronistic, allegorizing manner of speaking. It is based on the inner coherence of Old Testament and New Testament religion itself. As an aside, note the creedal affirmation at the outset, the preface of the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. That's the Old Testament creed. Continuing. These two, however different their forms of expression, are yet one in principle. The same purpose and method of God run through both. If, as is frequently urged nowadays, the Old Testament should be rejected and scorned as unworthy of the ideal religion, one may be sure that this attitude is due to abandonment of the entire soteric strain of the biblical religion as such. There may be, of course, single uncongenial features telling in the opinion of some against the Old Testament, but the source of the antagonism lies deeper and will be found on closer examination to relate to what Old Testament and New Testament have in common, the realism of redemption. The substance upon which the impression was made under the Old Testament may have been earthly clay. Nonetheless, the matrix that stamped it bore the lineaments of eternal law. Nonetheless, the matrix that stamped it bore the lineaments of eternal law and truth. We can here observe again how inseparably revelation through words is united to facts, nay, how for whole stretches the demarcation line between acts and words may even seem to have been lost altogether. This is a a very key and crucial idea, and it's especially with the backdrop of modernism, in which the factuality of biblical redemption is called into question, is doubted. Um, the very fact that Israel was very literally and really redeemed out of Egypt, and it's not a myth, it doesn't stand for some higher reality, that this happened together with the fact, 1 Corinthians 15, I have received, I delivered to you what I first received, that the Lord Jesus, that he suffered, he died, was buried, that he rose again, that he was seen of Cephas, then of the 12, right? So these are historical affirmations demonstrating to us that God is actually really redeeming this world and real people in real situations and contexts. Continuing. There is an irreconcilable difference between the religious consciousness that is at all times clearly or dimly aware of springing up and drawing nourishment from the soil of facts, and the consciousness that has emancipated itself from belief in the reality of the facts. Nor is it a difference in belief only, it is a difference in atmosphere and feeling of self. In spite of all his limitations, the Old Testament believer stands nearer to us in this respect than the so-called modern idealizer or spiritualizer of the Christian religion. So what Voss is basically saying is that, okay, the Old Testament believer was on a lower level of understanding of the fullness of these things, but he's on a much higher level together with New Testament believers based upon the fact that this is a real God speaking real words, doing real things in a real world, performing a real redemption, and not something that's like code for some other abstract, ideal. Continuing. The closest linking together of the facts and the practice of religious life is observable at this very point now reached by us. The Decalogue opens with one of the most profound references, as I was just mentioning earlier, to the soteric procedure of God in delivering the people from Egypt, Exodus 20, verse 2. The first offer of the Berit is preceded by an even more elaborate statement that seems baptized in the very warmth of divine affection, chapter 19, Exodus 19, verse 4. Let's actually just read that. That is such a dear verse and so very pregnant with significance. Exodus 19:4, ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. Continuing, and the long introductory discourse of Deuteronomy, semi-prophetic in spirit, partakes of the same tone and character. As late as Isaiah, the people are called upon to remind themselves of the ultimate roots of their religious origin in the things Jehovah did for them in the remote past, Isaiah 51:2. What then are the outstanding principles of the Exodus deliverance that were thus made regulative of all future salvation and bind things past and things to come indissolubly together?